We move to this now. The United States is planning to implement measures against African countries that trade with Russia. The act was passed in the U.S. House of Representatives, but is still waiting on approval from the Senate before being signed into law by the President. SADC countries have meanwhile expressed their unhappiness with this decision. For more on this, I'm joined by Advocate Sipho Mantula, a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. Advocate Mantula, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Now, the law seeks to sanction African countries that trade with Russia amid this war in Ukraine. It would appear, as raised by the African leaders this week, that this move would be deemed to be in bad taste, and it clearly seems to be a form of bullying here.
Newzroom Afrika to your viewers, and I think it's very important that, yes, we have to understand that the SADC summit came out very clear with that community to be saying that they need to go back to what we used to know as the NAM, the non-alignment movement. That if you can recall, when this war started in Canada, I used to say, if one recalls the words of Oliver Tambo, he used to raise those issues of African countries to be non-aligned to international wars. Now, if a regional body now is seeking towards the AU to look at this issue of going non-aligned in any conflict, it shows that African countries should not be bullied by the superpowers. But at the same time, let's look at the business that Blinken has been doing, Blinken all over this African continent, from DRC to Rwanda to even South Africa, trying maybe to come up with their policy towards Africa. But if one looks back again, it will show how international law is meaningless, toothless, in the sense that even in the First World War, in the Second World War, you were having those alliances of countries getting into a conflict or into a war. And again, finally, you'll understand, South Africa just came out from a military conference in Russia. Already one can sense that either USA is not happy with the move by the superpowers in the African continent, like South Africa, their stance, and even if you look at the numbers of African countries who voted at the UN General Assembly when this war erupted.
Now, South Africa is among countries that make up the AU that have also appealed for a peaceful dialogue to end this war in Ukraine. How has this message been received by the West, in your opinion?
You know, that again, I think South Africa has another additional role that is playing now. They are the member of the Peace and Security Council. But if one looks at the role of South Africa, I think the issue that we are raising on a peaceful and an open dialogue, I think that has been our foreign policy principle, that in conflicts that we are finding in the so-called the unipolar or the bipolar countries, there is a need to engage, because what is at stake here, it is humanitarian aid that we see that is lacking within the women and youth in this conflict zones. So if one looks at the role of South Africa, like I've said, we are both sitting at the AU Peace and Security Council. We are just outgoing out of the SADC on security, defense, and politics. So our role, I think, again, was strengthened by the 1994 moment when Nelson Mandela was able to mediate in many conflicts that include the Middle East, the conflict that include even the Rwanda genocide. So one can look at our role in terms of our document that came out in South Africa of our national interest framework. We should align it to what I call the continental and regional interest, as well as not losing the changing world that South Africa must stand and be firm that they are not being bullied by countries like USA coming with meaningless bills and sham bills, if one can say, because this bill is just about to be signed into law by Biden. But some of us will look at this bill as a meaningless, as a toothless bill.
I want us to track back a little bit before I let you go. Africa has historical ties with Russia, which date back to decolonization of the continent. Talk us through this aspect.
No, definitely. I was thinking about it earlier, actually, when I was looking at that. Russia was not part of the Berlin Conference. If you look at your history books, 101, the 1884 Berlin Conference, Russia was never a colonizer to many African countries, hence the aspect of decolonization. We see Russia's role in the Sahel region, whether positive or negative. We see the role of Russia in most of our liberation liberation movement, the ruling party as well, when they are looking at the training of their intelligence officers, are taking them to Russia. So if one can look, our connection with Russia, it is what I call it's an umbilical cord. It is between a mother and a child. That how Russia and Africa, they've been having that relationship. So for USA and France to be angry because they are sitting at the UN Security Council as the big five, I don't think they should be angry with how Russia has aligned itself with an African agenda. It's a pity even China, if one looks at the role of China in Africa, it is not of a negative force, it is of a positive force, and in most instances we will call it a multi-force that has come out from Russia in the continent. And that's how one views that Russia has never been the colonizer in the African continent.
But also interesting is that for a law that seemed urgent, it has been somewhat delayed.
No, definitely. I mean, that delay again, like I said, you are having interest playing out by these superpowers, and the Russian and the Ukraine conflict, it now puts Russia as a negative force. But at the same time, when all of us were looking at this conflict from the early stages, we knew that this was not a war or a conflict, but it was a military operation. But it has escalated. But when you look at the role of African countries, we have not seen African countries sending soldiers to Russia, but what we saw African students being stranded in Ukraine, even in the borders between Russia and Ukraine. Not anything that I think European countries have ever shown an interest on that humanitarian crisis, and hence the Africanization of conflict, we have to relook into them, because for some of us, we can't look at the 1960s era without looking at the 21st century, and that's where Agenda 2063 of the African Union, it speaks about a peaceful Africa and a peaceful global world.
Sipho Mantula, a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, of course, speaking there to those threats being made by U.S. lawmakers for possible sanctions against countries on the African continent that do business with Russia.